So the indications for lumbar interbody fusion are varied. Uh, Most commonly, we have spondylolisthesis, but we can have many other reasons for interbody fusion. Discogenic pain is one of the rare indications. So what should be our approach to radiology when you're planning a lumbar fusion? First of all, we have to look for the radiological signs of instability to decide on the lumbar fusion. And once we have decided lumbar fusion, we have to do look at the appropriate radiological signs to avoid complications. Or in other words, the top things you must definitely look for to prevent undesirable events and panic in the operation room. So a case like this, this is one of the illustrated cases where a patient has mechanical low back pain which is not improving, and as you can see here, there is a black disc. The dynamic X-rays do not show any instability. What should be the treatment for this? Sometimes we have to decide on a fusion. But in a case like this, what to do is pretty much clear that the patient has to undergo lumbar fusion because he's got pain which is not responding to conservative measures as lytic spondylolisthesis. What are the radiological signs of instability? The chief among them would be 5 signs, one of which is segmental dynamic listhesis, segmental kyphosis, when the disc height is preserved, there is bilateral facet effusion or sagittalization of facets. I will just deal with them one by one. So, segmental listhesis is relatively straightforward. This is what we generally look for. So, you do a dynamic X-ray, and if there is a difference of 2 millimeters, like here, you have a difference of 2.4 millimeter. Most surgeons take 2 millimeters. But in the literature, it is mentioned up to 5 millimeters. So this is not a very standardized calculation. Supine X-rays are definitely more clear. More than translation, a segmental kyphosis is more significant. So a change in the disc angle from neutral to extension, neutral in extension to kyphosis inflection. That more favors instability. Here you can see there is a 17 degrees difference. A cutoff is generally taken as 10 degrees. The problem with dynamic X-rays is that there is no standardization on the method of taking it or interpreting the X-rays, and slight changes in the positioning of the patient or of the gantry can cause significant variation. Another sign is preservation of the disc height. So if the disc height is preserved, there is a higher chances of progression of the listhesis. One of the authors put a cutoff as 6.5. Anything above 6.5 millimeter leads to progression. But a more appropriate way would be to compare it with the disc height above, and if it's less than 50%, or if it's more than 50%, it's likely to worsen. Presence of facet effusion bilaterally is another sign which is taken. More than 1 millimeter is significant. The fifth one would be facet tropism, that is sagittalization of the facet joints. And here you can see as in the coronal one is more stable, a coronal type of facet. When it is more sagittal, it is less stable. So how do you calculate this facet angle? So you draw a line connecting the dorsal points of each facet, then draw a line from the anterior part of each facet to this point. This angle, the average angle on both sides, is taken as the sagittal angle, and if it's more than 50 degrees, significant. Vacuum phenomenon is a very non-specific sign, and it can occur in asymptomatic disc spaces. So, of course, you see it better on a CT. So you have all these radiological signs, and one paper which came out in 2020 used a scoring system which included both clinical and radiological criteria, suggesting that a score of more than 5.5 out of a total possible score of 11 suggested instability. So they had good outcomes when their patients underwent decompression alone for those with a score of less than 5.5. So the next part of it would be what are the, once you decide on fusion, what are the preoperative planning on radiology. So one would be the planning the instrumentation. Second would be to avoid complications, so therefore to look for osteoporosis, conjoined nerve roots, foraminal stenosis, and transitional vertebrae. I'll deal with it one by one. So planning the instrumentation, the diameter and the length of screws. I always look at this preoperatively. So if you choose this early, it improves the surgical workflow intraoperatively. And sometimes you can identify a very small pedicle, for example, a dysplastic spondylolisthesis, and you may not want to cannulate that, or you might want to use a smaller pedicle screw. If you suspect osteoporosis, my normal criteria would be to do a baseline T score and on the DEXA scan, and if severe treatment might be required. Most importantly, we can plan augmentation of the screws with cement or use a fenestrated screw. This can be planned prior. I always look for foraminal stenosis on MRI. And here you can see there are multiple grading system. Here you can see that the severe stenosis when there is no fat seen either perineurally or in the foramen, or when there is distortion of the nerve. So if both the, so why is foraminal, looking for foraminal stenosis important? So if both foramens have severe stenosis, bilateral facetectomy will have to be performed, especially if both sides are symptomatic. And as you know, it's a little difficult in MIS TLIF to do bilateral. But if there is only mild to moderate stenosis, facetectomy need be done only on the symptomatic side. So we can put a little bigger cage to open up the opposite foramen. Conjoined nerve roots is not as apparent like this preoperatively. Radiological signs are very difficult to, it's quite subtle, and you can have significant difficulty when you identify them intraoperatively. Once I had a very difficult case and I had to change the side of the minimally invasive TLIF to the opposite side to proceed with the surgery because there was a large nerve root in the way. So the only sign sometimes might be an enlarged dural sac or an enlarged lateral recess. So sometimes the radiologist reports these. Transitional vertebra is very important to look for, and this is a cause for a wrong level surgery. So it's important to correlate the X-rays with the MRI. Last but not the least, the pelvic incidence, to calculate the pelvic incidence. Pelvic incidence is a fixed number, and your lumbar lordosis should be at least 10 degrees short of the PI. It should be within 10 degrees. So as we know, L4 to S1 makes up about 60% of the lumbar lordosis. If you do not create adequate lordosis, it can be a cause for adjacent segment degeneration and failure down the line. So there's a question that which one is good for MIS, which one is good for open. I would say all are relative contraindications, but there are certain conditions where open is preferred over MIS TLIF. When you have a high-grade spondylolisthesis, when there is severe osteoporosis or obesity and it's difficult to see the X-rays properly, when the patient is extremely obese and you have to use a 8 or 10 millimeter tube to reach the target, when there is an extensive epidural scar or a deformed spine and there is rotation, it is sometimes difficult to visualize radiologically. Docking issues can occur if there is a very large facet, and Most of these are relative contraindications. Like I said, many of the faculty have good experience with MIS TLIF even in these difficult cases. So what is the take-home message? You should correlate the clinical instability with uh, evidence of radiological instability prior to a lumbar fusion. Combination of radiological signs is more suggestive of instability. Preoperative planning makes surgical workflow easy. Preoperatively to looking for osteoporosis, conjoined nerve roots, foraminal stenosis, and transitional vertebrae can prevent intraoperative complications. Thank you.